Hi there, it's Stephanie Shea, the Chief Astrologer for janspiller.com. I think I'm live. I'm new to this whole Facebook Live. Hi there, I think I've started now. This is Stephanie Shea, Chief Astrologer for janspiller.com. And many of you know me by now, but I have worked for this website for a long time, and I studied and worked with Jan between 2012 and 2016. And most of you know by now she passed away in 2016, and her wish was to keep the website and her social media sites going as a resource. And it's with great honor that I've been continuing this work, and mostly it's in the form of writing. So the video format has been a new thing for me, and this live is very new. This is only the second time I've been live on Facebook, so thank you for joining. I'm going to try to see if I can get to the page so I can see questions, because right now I'm not seeing that. Yeah, okay. So I'm not going to touch my computer because it seems like it doesn't want to do that. So I will get to questions at the end, even if I have to open a new Facebook page to do that. But first I'll offer some information about what we're coming into, which is a Venus retrograde cycle. It actually doesn't start till next month. The official dates are May 13th to June 25th. However, we have just entered what is called the shadow phase. And I won't bog you down with too much technical stuff, but the shadow phase is when a lot of people may begin to feel the effects of this retrograde, which has to do with slowing down and reassessing values in the case of Venus. I am going to briefly mention the difference between a Venus retrograde and, say, a Mercury retrograde. Oh, okay, this is great. I can actually see comments. So a friend of mine waved, and I was like, great, I can see you, Pearl. So yeah, so what the shadow phase means is that today, April 10th, Venus is at 5 degrees of Gemini, and it's still moving forward. Again, it won't be retrograde until May 13th. And by the time it's all done retrograding at the end of June, it will be back at this 5-degree point. So we're sort of the beginning of the cycle. And I think people feel retrogrades a bit differently. I will touch on, if you were born under Venus retrograde, that actually will feel very familiar to you when the planet Venus stations retrograde. And Jan has done some videos on this. If you have especially inner planet retrogrades in your birth chart, when those planets go retrograde is actually kind of a power time. And the rest of the time, it can often feel like you're swimming upstream a little bit. So this is your time to shine, all you Venus retrograde babies out there. And what the shadow can do is sort of start to open the question that needs to be resolved or answered. The retrogrades have a lot to do with going back and resolving the past. And with the planet Venus ruling both love and money, these matters are at the forefront during this retrograde time. I personally don't always feel the shadows. I wasn't born with Venus retrograde. I was born with Mercury retrograde, but I've kind of had a theory lately, while we're in this quarantine situation, is that maybe I haven't felt the retrograde shadow, or other people haven't felt it during normal times, because it's sort of business as usual and people are doing their routines, and it can be more subtle in the shadow. But now that we are in essence, a forced reflective place, I feel that people might actually be tuned in to these more subtle energies. And this Venus retrograde, I believe, is bringing messages. It's in the sign of Gemini, which is kind of the messenger sign of the zodiac. And so there's a message or a lesson unfolding. Often we don't see the whole meaning of it until the end of the retrograde cycle, and we look back in hindsight. But because we're in such a unique time where we are inward more, we're in our homes, we're more reflective, then I think we might start working with this process sooner than later. Now, let me give you a note about the month of April. This is actually one of the few months of 2020 where no inner planet are in retrograde. So I have a little catchphrase, which is the shadow is as good as it gets. So definitely, if you have things you can get done and get sort of buttoned up before May 13th, Venus retrograde, go for it. Yes, we're in a shadow, but if we waited for no shadow phase, we wouldn't get anything done this year. And there is still a big push with the sun in Aries. There's some initiating energies. I think a good thing to do, knowing the Venus retrograde is coming up, is do some temporary planning. And that really fits this time period pretty well. It's kind of hard to do a long-term plan right now. We're sort of day to day, week to week, month to month, maybe at the most. So if something is unresolved money-wise, for example, okay, well, what's our strategy for this short increment of time? It may have to change into a bigger picture strategy. The retrogrades serve as the research and development phase for us in astrology. So they do serve a purpose. Sometimes they get a bad reputation, like, oh, you can't get anything done, it's retrograde, I'll go back to bed. But really, you can do a lot, especially on things that you have already gotten a little bit started or that you've been thinking about for a really long time. It can finally be when you have the chance to finish that project, to look into that thing that you have been interested in that you just haven't had time to research until now. So think of it that way. When it comes to relationships, it's definitely a time not to make huge decisions. The conventional wisdom is sort of put yourself in a holding pattern if you're a little bit on the fence about what's going on relationship-wise. You know, this time period anyway is sort of a great time to hit the pause on a lot of things in our life. But I think Venus retrograde is especially when it comes to relationship, and it's time to explore what's been up for you. Now, Venus is going retrograde in the sign of Gemini, which is all about communication. I really am relieved about this because that's kind of what we're working with these days. Conversation, written communication. There's a lot of people, if they aren't living with a partner or, you know, other people, what we have still is the ability to get on a video chat on the phone, type an email or a text. These are really being supported, and it could be a time, you know, to reconnect with people from your life. It's not just about former romantic relationships. It can be for friends. It can be for business partners. And again, like that creative idea that maybe you've wanted to develop, creative collaborators from your past, and you're getting online and working on a project together. So think of how to use it in these ways. So the main difference between a Venus retrograde and a Mercury retrograde is that Venus is all about your emotions, your heart, your values, what makes you feel good, what is the thing that you need to do to attract beneficial situations into your life. And Mercury retrograde is more about the brain and the intellect. I think the thing in common, because Venus is in Gemini, it could feel a little bit like a Mercury retrograde in that miscommunication can occur. So be very careful in your words with others. Giving people the benefit of the doubt is always a good way to go, and clarifying if you feel that someone has really missed the point of what you were trying to communicate. Let's see, some other tips and things going on for Venus retrograde. If you are single during a Venus retrograde, obviously right now, I really hope everyone is following public health guidelines. You're not out there meeting people in person. but you may be chatting online. And so this is a time where you could meet someone new. You may not know exactly where it's going. It's not a time to do that anyway. So this is a time to enjoy some conversation, getting to know people because of the emphasis on the past. I think sometimes during a Venus retrograde cycle, people meet someone who feels very familiar to them. If you believe in past lives, it could feel like somebody from a past life. This is going to be your time. Again, if you use research and development as your mantra, I know that sounds a little scientific for relationships, but kind of as your blanket approach to things. Yes, you are curious. Venus in Gemini has innate curiosity. This is good. Learn as much as you can about anyone new you meet, but it's definitely not time to decide much more than that. More will be revealed. And I think messages from the past are a big theme in general. And that could include messages from someone who has passed on to the other side. You may feel like you're getting special signs that help you reconnect to that person. Maybe you hear a song or see something out in nature that is as if that person was giving you some love and support from the other side. So the trajectory of this, just to make sure everyone's clear on what's going on, we've entered the shadow today. So again, some people may feel it more than others, but as we move towards May 13th, just keeping in mind, okay, that Venus retro, it's coming, it's getting stronger. If I haven't made a decision about a big purchase or a relationship, let's put a lid on it. Let's try to make some temporary solutions. Let's be more conservative. It's definitely really good to be conservative with money under Venus retrograde. And, you know, that most people I know are doing that now in these circumstances that we have. It's uncanny how the astrology is matching what has manifested in the world around us right now. And we're in this for a bit of a stretch. So even when Venus goes direct at the end of June, we will have been through all this other astrology. We've got eclipses coming up, and I hope to do some talks on that. We'll have eclipses June 5th, June 21st, and July 5th. These are all key turning points. The energy is shifting. You can see how it might feel a bit frustrating sometimes because I think people will have this desire, like, I'm ready, I had this realization, I'm excited, what's the next step? And it's just not quite the time to take the next step. It's research and development. I also think about it a lot like a garden bed, and you go out there, you know, for a lot of us in the Northern Hemisphere, it's spring and you're so excited to get some seeds in the ground, but there's weeds everywhere and the soil's a mess, and it's all that prep work before you can even plant the seed. And by this summer, we'll be planting some seeds. We'll come out of that Mercury retrograde mid-July. And so just keeping that in mind, end of July into August, we're going to be in that good as it gets shadow phase where we may be able to get a little bit going before the next retrograde. And I won't overwhelm you with Mars retrograde right now, but well, I definitely will keep you updated. So I'm getting some hellos from Bulgaria and Mexico City, which is really awesome. Hello, I hope everyone is well over there. And I will be happy to take some questions about Venus retrograde. I can touch on if it's retrograde in your chart in certain ways, or if the retrograde is happening on a planet in your chart. For example, if you're born under the sign of Gemini, I think you're really going to feel this one if Venus goes retrograde where the sun was at the time of your birth. It's emphasizing that internal journey, that introspection. You could have some real breakthroughs. What I like about Venus going retrograde in something like Gemini is it's really cerebral. It can really help you have that aha moment on an intellectual level. And when you're dealing with relationship matters, which can feel so emotional, you can finally get maybe a little bit of distance from that and see it in a way that you don't feel as bogged down in certain emotions, if that makes sense. So I had a question this week that was a really good one. What if Venus retrograde is going over my moon? Well, that's a great one because the moon represents how we nurture ourselves, how we nurture others, and it can also represent a relationship with a significant woman or nurturing person in your life. Sometimes your mother, sometimes someone else like that, your daughter, your sister. Something like this, Venus retrograde, is going to emphasize that. Maybe there's something that needs to be resolved. There's a reconnection or a clarification that needs to happen. So you will definitely feel that, I think, if Venus is going retrograde over your moon or your sun or one of your very personal planets. Let's see, we've got, there's so many cool countries being represented. Oslo, Norway, Toronto, Canada. Welcome. I'm so glad that this is an amazing thing to be able to connect with people all over the world. We've got, what about Sagittarius and Scorpio rising? Okay, so I think this person may have Sagittarius sun and a Scorpio rising. So Venus isn't going retrograde over those points in your chart. It's hard without seeing the rest of it, but it's possible, you know, that you will feel this in a certain area of your life. And again, I'm trying to do a picture in my head of, okay, here's the Scorpio rising wheel, what area is Venus? But we really, since I don't know the degree, I would say it's not as direct of a hit for someone who's a Sagittarius or Scorpio rising unless they have a Gemini moon, for example. Now we've got natal Saturn 2 degrees Gemini on the second house. Okay, this is a good one that just came in. Now I mentioned that Venus is at 5 degrees Gemini now. That's only 3 degrees away, right? So it already just passed over your Saturn. For the person who asked this question, Christina, maybe you thought something within the past week or so when this first pass happened. Now, keep in mind, Venus is now moving forward for a while. Then it's going to take till the end of June to come back close to that Saturn. It will be back at 5 degrees at the end of June. I would pay a lot of attention to what was up in the past week or so. Saturn in our charts represents work, lessons, life lessons. I have a feeling there's something here to be learned that you're going to feel like you're getting a message about, whether it's a person, a relationship, or a money related lesson, because Saturn can also rule our work. And this is kind of a unique thing in this time period too, because a lot of people are undergoing like this retraining in their jobs. Suddenly school teachers have to know how to use all this online technology that wasn't really originally in their job description. So I'm seeing like, oh yeah, this whole next Venus retrograde in Gemini, people learning, relearning their jobs, even if they have kept their jobs. And for the people who are out of work, they may be relearning or learning a new skill to find some employment. So that's a great question. Those are potential themes for you, Christina. How should we, this is cool. How should we read Venus retrograde in an intercepted sign? I have Gemini intercepted in the 7th. Okay, and so that's when there's the house and it's kind of like two different signs going on. So Gemini, I would have to see the degrees of the 7th house, but if Venus is going retrograde through your 7th house, then I would say you're going to really feel the relationship facet of this Venus retrograde, maybe more than the money one, unless you happen, to be in a business partnership. And then in that case, it might be, wow, we have to really rethink and do some research and development about how this partnership is functioning. But seventh house can also be, seen as the house of marriage. And so this could be a time, if you're in a marriage, to be reflecting on that. And then, for the other part of the seventh house that's not Gemini, it's not as important at this time. The part of the seventh house that's really being lit up with this Venus retrograde is the Gemini part. So that's a really good question. There's a lot of technical things about astrology that that it can be so subtle, where that's why some people feel it more strongly than other people, because it really does have a lot to do with your personal makeup. But then there's an overall backdrop as well, where I think when it's a Venus retrograde, even if it's not touching on something, it's going to have to touch on a house, because everybody has Gemini somewhere hidden in there. But, in general, it's felt as the overall atmosphere is not supporting new money-related or relationship-related decisions. That's sort of the takeaway on that one. Now, one thing I do want to touch on quickly before we might wrap up soon is that it really is important to reflect on yourself during this time. It's, people tend to forget the relationship they have with themselves. And what I like about Venus retrograde in Gemini, again, there's a component of writing that goes with Gemini. They're known as the writers. You don't have to be a writer, but journaling can be especially powerful and productive during this Venus retrograde in Gemini. So I'm going to try to take an opportunity to interview myself, check in on my thoughts and dreams. Again, it's the things you value. And I think we're all evaluating that right now. We used to live in the world this one way, and now suddenly our world has drastically changed, and we're thinking, oh, that thing I thought was so important, it's actually not that important. So this is something to consider. And I really like the idea of rewriting your script. We have these stories that we tell ourselves in our lives, and, well, I've always been this way, and this is how it's going to be. Venus retrograde is a time to rewrite the script for yourself. So that's, I think, a powerful thing to leave with. I'm going to just peek over here and see if there's any other questions. I was so cool seeing people from around the world here and getting these questions about their chart. And you can always send a personal message, and, we can chat about setting up readings. That's something I do. And, especially based around this Venus retrograde, could be a really interesting thing to examine. So, okay. Well, this has been a really good experience. I'm really looking forward to trying out some new Facebook Live events in the future. And thanks so much to everyone who joined. And I will check back with you on the next one. We're going to post this up on YouTube. And I hope everyone has a great rest of your day. Thanks for attending.